This is the Olympic Files, and I'm Al.
I'm Theo.
What we're going to do today is lay some baseline down for the message we want to get across. We've been down this road before, quite often, but not in this particular manifestation. But entitled the series, Once Upon a Time, ... because we're dealing in America with a fairy tale about ourselves. And we'll explain that further as we go on, or else we have nothing at all to discuss. But there's plenty of reasons that we say that and examples that underlie that really the problem in America is Americans are propagandized into believing they can't be propagandized. And so here we go. One thing I'd like to say, Theo, and we want to just start real quick from the beginning, and that is even the notion that we have about countries aren't necessarily places where, to borrow from the American lexicon, huddled masses yearning to be free went to find safe haven. But that's really not the reason why. There's nation building. And if you don't mind, you want to take it from there?
Well, as you said before, the Statue of Liberty is really a great big help wanted sign. It was a new market that got opened up. That's all America was about. That's all it's ever about. In our daily lives, we know the meaning of the phrase, it's all about the money, or when we're looking after the truth of something small, we'll say, follow the money. We need to expand that. I mean, that explains all of history. It's about the money. And Jesus said, the love of money is the root of all evil. I think he knew what he was talking about. The United States was founded as a new market. Now, in the beginning with the Pilgrims, yes, they wanted religious freedom. But in order to get that, in order to be able to have the finances to get over here, they had to sign some contracts with the king, some binding mercantile contracts to get over here. And those contracts are still binding. The I-Man goes into that. He looked into the contracts of his particular state. I think James Montgomery did as well. Those original contracts, they're still around.
What Theo's referring to is the Informer has written a number of books about the way things really are. What Theo just said was that he went back and took a look into the very roots of, if you will, the creation of North Carolina. James Montgomery also has written one book in particular, A Country Defeated in Victory. The writings of both these individuals you can access on thinkorbeeaten.com. Just look for their names, and you can hit that link. Go ahead.
The James Montgomery book that deals with largely the Revolutionary era is The United States is Still a British Colony. With his later, actually he may have written it before, with his book A Country Defeated in Victory, he deals more with the late 1800s and especially the early 1900s.
And again, those writings can be accessed on thinkorbeeaten.com. I would really encourage you to take a look at it because reading this kind of stuff, in this case, it is pretty interesting, and it also allows you to process it and go look elsewhere for research that supports it, or in their cases, a lot of times, in fact, if not all the times, they will supply the sources from which they drew that information. So you can go take a look for yourself and find out that, in fact, it is what they said it is.
The King George, well, and as you've noted many times with me, when it came to writing the Treaty of Paris at the conclusion of the American Revolutionary War, King George wrote the terms of that treaty. Since when does the loser ever draw up the terms of the treaty? That should be a red flag to historians, but they've missed on that one.
Yeah, if you, in fact, we might provide some of the links for this with the audio, so that it'll be quicker for you to take a look. But the treaty to which Theo refers, in the very beginning, it's very interesting. that one of the things that King George would call himself, as he lists his many titles, is the Elector of the Holy Roman Empire. That's very interesting. But as he goes on and writes the terms, it's true. He is the one that's dictating, not the one that's ceding anything. Now, just consider this. Unlike other land purchases that this government made, most notably the Louisiana Purchase, for instance, and the Gadsden Purchase, and a few others, we never purchased the land from England. We never did. Oh, so people say, but we won them as spoils of war. No, we didn't. And that treaty makes it very clear that we didn't win anything except the right to call the colonies states or estates.
And as James Montgomery and the Informer show, King George, he gave Americans at that time, he gave them individual freedom, excuse me, but he never gave up the mineral rights. In other words, he never gave up the land, and that's what really counts.
Yeah, the riparian rights and all that go along with it. When you read that treaty, it was basically business as usual, with the only exception that the states could call themselves such. They were allowed to do that, and that's it. That's all that was granted. Also,
King George, I think it's Montgomery that goes into this, King George never could have given up the land. That was an investment that the crown made, the crown and the king. And, you know, the royals, they're not stupid. Long ago, they passed this law of mortmain, which prevented, in the case some idiot king should come along and want to give everything away, he couldn't. They have a law built in that says no king or queen can give away anything that rightfully belongs to his posterity. Isn't going to happen, never can happen. The only way you could do that is to conquer and kill the king completely. That's the only way that America actually could have won that Revolutionary War.
Yeah. The point is that that land was not ceded to the new United States. It was not purchased. And so what conclusion would you come to? We're still tenants, if you will, on this land. And so, one of the things we're not going to get into today, but people, especially the Tea Party individuals, they kind of get it because now they realize that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. But they don't understand the totality of that. They think they can just get rid of the Federal Reserve. No. They think that the president's wagged the Federal Reserve. No. The Federal Reserve has as its head an employee of the World Bank, not of the United States federal government. So the point is that we had this war supposedly to throw off taxation without representation, but the taxation never stopped. And that's one of the things that England wanted to get straight with the founders or the framers, whatever you want to call them. And that is, this is business as usual, and we do have an investment, and we want a return on it. And we'll go into this perhaps the second time we come together, and that is the Constitution was struck to protect the founders and the framers and to allay any fears or any anger that would arise over the money not going west to east as it had been throughout so many decades.
One of the more fascinating things Montgomery does, I think this was Montgomery, he lists them, this labyrinthine forms and procedures. It takes up a couple of paragraphs in his book. What he shows you is how today's IRS 1040 form, ultimately what you're paying goes back to Britain. Same as always.
Yeah, people are probably saying we're full of crap and the jaws are dropping on the ground, their eyeballs are popping, but take a look, and that's where I was driving at.
Well, that's that proverb, that proverb, what is it? I think it's 18:17, 17:18, something like that, where it says, he who answers a matter before he hears it It is folly and shame unto him. So they need to go check it out instead of just dismissing it, or they're being foolish.
Well, one of the things that the Internet has done, and probably is kind of self-defeating or counterproductive to people understanding exactly the way the world really is, and that is there is so much information, and of course we're contributing to it right now, but there's so much misinformation and disinformation, and as a result, usually, and of course you have the human tendency not to want to believe what is unpleasant, and that's the way you and I both approach this. We didn't like what we came up with, but there was no arguing that it was what it was. And so that's all we want to share. This is not touched upon by really anybody. Even the so-called patriots of the United States have no idea that the Constitution was not written for them, and that they have no constitutional protections, and also we don't have any rights. We have privileges. And that's also stated in the Constitution, but people don't want to believe that's what it says. When it talks about habeas corpus, it states that it's a privilege, not a right.
Which historically has been taken away several times in America.
Yeah, that and posse comitatus, folks, give me a break, will you? What the federal government does is what it wishes to do, and nobody stops it. And you can talk about all kinds of rights and such, but when it comes to messing with the feds in any way, shape, or form, you are without any allies. Not the court, and not the law. But that's another day. But one of the other things I wanted to touch upon, you mentioned Scripture at the very beginning, so people are thinking, oh, okay, what are these guys, crypto Christians and such? No, but there's another thing that's going on in America, and it stays just long enough. It's just ingrained enough to make people feel okay about the things that this country does. So what am I saying? There's this feeling amongst the Christian community, I would agree, that this country has some kind of special relationship with God, that there's some kind of special dispensation for this country because Pilgrims and Puritans came over, and probably easily the majority were Christians in whatever shape or form. I don't know. A lot of people call them Christians who only pop up, for Christmas and Easter, and that's about it. Nominal Christians, I guess we could call them. But that's not the case at all. There's no relationship between God and our government or our country. Now, that's made very clear in Scripture, but it's something Christians kind of blow over because however they got that notion, it did not come out of Scripture. It comes out of our indoctrination through the public fool system, and of course in public works, and I should say public, popular works, mass consumption, textbooks, and entertainment for the most part. And of course, there's just enough trappings left in our government and such, where they'll say, "So help me God," or you swear on the Bible. There's just enough of that there to make it seem like, oh, we're really a godly country, and we have to become more godlike in order to maintain our prosperity and this favored status that we have. But that's baloney, and that does not come out of the Bible. The other thing, what I'm saying is it's convenient, is because how Christian was it for the military in this country, the government of this country, to conduct a genocide for arguably over a century? Some would say more than that. How did that sit with Christians? I never could understand that God would smile upon that. That, what is it, the Native Americans are just in the way? They're collateral damage. The other thing is, of course, and we'll talk about this later, I mean, this country's been at war forever. And there's something wrong with a country that would be at war or engaged in some kind of conflagration somewhere, I mean, arguably since the Spanish-American debacle. So I know I've said a lot there, but there is this thing that somehow everything that we do has the imprimatur of God, and that is just not so, and it does not come out of the Scripture, which should be the final word on it. And that's a lot that I've said there, but I'm going to throw it to you, Theo. Your thoughts on this?
The Nazis learned a lot from America. Now, it's going to sound shocking to historically illiterate Americans, which most of us are anymore, but it's a fact that Hitler looked to the genocide of the Native American Indians as a precedent for his own genocide, and he brought that up many times, and that was his justification. That's where he learned it. That's where he learned to genocide. Or again, at least that's where he justified it. And also, the good old Roman salute of the good old Heil Hitler, the Heil Hitler salute. That came. The Nazis did not invent that. Yes, it goes all the way back to Rome, but however, the Nazis more directly learned that from America.
By the way, I just went to that site yesterday because I hadn't been there in a while. As you well know, and I think you interviewed him as well, there is a lawyer in Tampa by the name of Rex Curry, Curry, and he is a staunch anti-socialist, anti-communist, and he has a website, rexcurry.net. And as soon as you hit that link, you'll come to a bit of a history of socialism in this country. And I'm not going to get into this thing about, well, socialism is good, it's bad, it's whatever people want it to be, or governments want it to be. So let's let that lie for now. But the thing is, he also goes back and shows what the original Pledge of Allegiance salute was, or whatever kind of flag waving or raising exercise they had out in the schoolyard before the school day. And you will see that it is what you could call the Roman salute, or what we've come to know as what the Nazis used. That's what we did in this country. And he has plenty of photos documenting where it was, when it was, and that's pretty much the way things were until Hitler picked it up. And then that kind of thing just faded away for obvious reasons in the United States. But, you know, as far as symbology goes too, Theo, I mean, you know, you think about it, take a look at your money, take a look at the one side of the Great Seal. I mean, the Nazis used an eagle. We use an eagle. The eagle has in its talons the fasci of wheat, fascism. It's the same stuff. So we are not that far removed from the Nazi influence. In fact, if anything, and you know that we've discussed this in many ways, that after World War II, the spirit of Nazism crept into us, and we are about to pay a price for that, as this particular Reich is on rocky ground and is not long for this world.
And think about it. Every country that goes to war believes that God is on their side. At least the soldiers on the ground do, most of them. And you have Christian evangelicals sending their sons, and now shamefully enough their daughters, over to be cannon fodder for this NWO thing. But you know, it was the same thing with Nazi Germany. The German soldiers, most of them, who were invading Poland, they thought that God was on their side. Of course, they all do it. And so they're doing it again.
Yes, like we said before, and I'm thinking about this because we're recording this the day before the Super Bowl. And if there's anything that makes me more uncomfortable is the spectacle that the halftime show has become. And of course, there is in this country interwoven this government, or the state, you could call it, the military, and entertainment, or sports. There's always a lot of actually unjustifiable examples and parallels between athletics, the events, the contests, and war. I remember, though, that somebody put it very succinctly and got it right. There was a famous pitcher in the major leagues by the name of Bob Feller, who was a no-nonsense guy. His heyday was in the 40s, early 50s. And he had been in World War II. And, of course, when he started to hear this bit about athletes saying, well, you know, we're going to war, or he's the kind of guy you'd like to go to war with. I don't know if you remember this, Theo, but Feller said, anybody who says that sports is war has never been to war.
Yeah.
However, we have the national anthem. We have military presence, overflying of jets and such. And it's like, if you really stop and think about it, what has that got to do with playing a ball game?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, it's not that big a deal, but when does this thing about playing the Star-Spangled Banner or doing the Pledge of Allegiance before any athletic contest come into being? What is that supposed to mean? What's the connection?
An advertisement for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, that's what it is.
Well, yeah, and there's a glorification of the military happening now, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful at all, but there seems to be an embracing of the soldier more and more. It's become more palpable in this country, and I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm not saying that's bad, but it seems to fly in the face of the way veterans were treated from World War I onward after they've done their service.
From what I've heard, it flies in the face from how they're treated now from the VA when they get back if they're wounded.
Yeah, that is true, but I'd have to say that as far as what pops up, just in our culture, there's more and more, like, for instance, every soldier that goes over is called a hero now. All right, now, is there a problem with that? Well, maybe not necessarily, but the thing is, if somebody goes in voluntarily, and perhaps because there's not a lot of good jobs out there, is that really being a hero? Well, I understand the whole bit about defending your country and that, right, but this is all I'm saying is that there is somewhat of an elevation of the warrior and the warrior class.
And those guys who fight over there, who are signed up for the service, it's not even just about them anymore. We have a bigger and bigger presence of mercenaries like Blackwater fighting right next to them who make a lot more money, make them very, very jealous.
Yeah, they thus changed their name because of some of the associations the company had with certain, shall we say, unpleasant episodes, both in the United States and abroad. But that is true. Still in all, what I'm saying is that we're preparing a generation or more for perhaps looking upon the military more favorably or being forced into it because of a horrible job market, and that is to beef up a military that will be used for a future and last World War. But getting back to the origins of this country and this myth, or as George Carlin said, it's the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. Let's take a look back also, not at the Constitution necessarily and how that came into being and what got kicked to the curb to make room for it, but the founders themselves. I'll say this, shoot at it if you will. If you remember going through the public fool system, did it not seem that the founders almost were like demigods? It's like they were beyond human in a sense in their like goodness and their intelligence and their wisdom. I don't know. What was your take? Maybe that didn't happen with you because you were quite a bit behind me.
Yeah, absolutely, they were. And that is also how they are portrayed in our national Capitol buildings. There's that dome, and I forget exactly which dome, in Washington, D.C., but on the inside of it, Washington, I think the painting is even called this, but I know that Stephen Michael Schroeder has called this the apotheosis of Washington. There's a famous painting up on the ceiling there, and it depicts Washington as a god.
Yeah. Now, is there a problem with that?
Yeah, the man was an elitist, insider trading scumbag.
You left out realtor.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean by he was an inside trader in realty, and this comes from Gustavus Myers, I think the best historian America ever produced. He documents how, before it was determined where the capital of the country was going to be placed, there were a few insiders who knew that it was going to be placed at what is now Washington, D.C., and originally was called Rome, interestingly enough. But George Washington was one of these men, and a few others, and they hurriedly bought up all of the cheap property in what is now Washington, D.C. Then suddenly, the Congress at the time declared declared their plans. D.C. would be the capital, and Washington and his cronies made a bundle.
The particular Myers work that you extracted information from Is that one of the books that's online?
Yes, they're all online at, that Yamaguchi site.
All right, I'll put the link up for it. So people can read that for themselves. Now, they've never heard of Gus Myers.
And I think that particular documentation came from the history of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Right. He has a few others that are accessible. That would be what? The history of the great American fortunes?
Yeah, that's probably the one he's most known for. Then he's got the history of the Supreme Court, the history of Tammany Hall, and he's also got the history of Canadian wealth, which I've never read.
Yeah, take off, eh? Who cares?
Well, he's going to obviously document the Bronfmans up there.
I tell you what, just for now, can you give folks a thumbnail of Myers and the period in which he wrote? Because nobody obviously had got a whiff of him.
The muckrakers, the turn of the 20th century, the very late 1800s, early 1900s, which in some ways was kind of like the dying gasp of consciousness in this country. You had quite a few writers who were alerting the country, and they were, I would say, linked to the populist movement of William Jennings Bryan. And they were trying to warn people of what the robber barons were doing. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans,
Vanderbilt,
the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Goulds, the Pews, all of these guys. And you had Ida Tarbell, who was rightfully exposing the criminal takeover of the Rockefellers. You had, the one that they teach the most because, he's the safest to teach because he wrote he based it in fiction, and he doesn't name a lot of specific names. So the one that's most famous today, that's the safest to teach, is Upton Sinclair.
Yep.
But
True.
Gustavus Myers was another one, and he's kind of forgotten of the bunch. If I spent more time, I could think of some more of the names of these muckrakers. But yeah, Gus Myers, man, wow, I don't know how he found the time to research all of this stuff, but he was prolific, and he was meticulous. And if you hear about him, if you come across him referenced at all today, and you do once in a while in books, and I know Ferdinand Lundberg even references him once in a book of his. But you know what they will never do? They will never criticize Gus Myers' facts. He's never been proven wrong, any of his claims. However, what they criticize about him is his tone, his constantly critical tone. Well, sometimes, as you have been wont to tell me, sometimes, I'm sorry, the news just isn't good. And what if, historically, we have been run by a bunch of plutocrats who deserve to be criticized? And Gus Myers does a great job of that. I think he died in around 1940. He was born in 1860, something like that. He led a pretty long life.
Yeah, he was. Do you remember the last work he put out?
Well, I have been told, but I've never come across it. I've been told at the time of his death, he was working on a book about the history of religious hypocrisy and where the money goes in the religious systems in America. I've never come across any title of it or anything like that, but that's what I've been told by someone, and that it's unfinished. But I wish I could come across that. That would be fascinating. As far as I know, that was what he was working on. If there was something else, you got to tell me.
No, what I was doing as you were speaking is I don't have the Yamaguchi website where those books can be had. I went to archive.org, but I will go to the Yamaguchi because the reason I'm thinking about this is that there is a excerpt of a quote by the New York Times at the time that Myers was writing, and it actually kind of gave him as much as a mainstream newspaper would do, kind of an okay. You know, like, yeah, all right. They didn't try to demonize him, but they wouldn't pat him on the back either. And the thing I have to laugh at, too, just to digress for a second, I went back in the New York Times archives to see how they treated the idea of the Federal Reserve System and of the main Federal Reserve Bank being housed in New York City. And, you know, we were all told, we were all beaten over the head with the fact that the Times is kind of like the paragon of journalism. But during that time that the Federal Reserve was trying to be sold to the people, if you will, what would pass for an op-ed piece now was front page news, in other words, masquerading as hard news, which it was not. It was subjective. It was very much opinion. And I couldn't believe how much they just gushed over the Fed. So here you have, by the second decade of the 20th century, you already have the newspapers, the influential ones, being bought out by money and by power. At least, let's put it this way. It wasn't all that overt in a sense, but it is chronicled that Rockefeller got together a number of influential publishers, newspaper publishers in the United States, and basically said, this is how it goes. And so we've not really had a free press in anybody's lifetime that could hear this show right now. It already had happened. And if you were to go back in the archives and read it for yourselves, you see exactly what I mean. And what's really interesting about that as well, one last aside, and that is the whole creation of the Federal Reserve was unconstitutional. But the ones who gave it up was Congress, who was charged with what? Coining money and was affixing a value thereof, something like that. Well, they gave that up to the Fed. And that was
Myers documents that pretty much all through American history, the Congress and also the Supreme Court, they're bought and sold. The plutocrats, the people who really run the country actually own these men. They're puppets of them. It's the same as today, of course, but it's always been that way.
Yeah, there's never any shortage of people and organizations that will do anything for the money, which is kind of way we came into this whole thing, saying that in the end, it's not about freedom, it's about business. It will always be about business. And the first laws on this planet were really to cover mercantilism on the ocean. The original law of the sea. So it's always about the money, and that's what the founding of the United States was about. It was about a new market. And again, like you had said before, this whole idea about bringing huddled masses yearning to be free into the country, actually it was like, we are hiring, now hiring. So come on over. Because, go ahead.
Finish your thought, Al, but since we have spoken out against the God of this nation, Washington, we do need to say a few other things to justify what we said about him.
All right, well, I'll just do this. This brings us full circle to the idea about the Fed. The Fed has just replaced, as the informer would write, the British Board of Trade. That's a conduit where we're still paying tribute to the Crown. Make no mistake about it. And I'll just leave it there because I'll just go into something else, and I don't want to go any further from where I already departed. So go ahead. That's where I'm bringing it. The Fed is powerful, more powerful than our government. Don't think you're ever going to get rid of it.
All right. No, of course not.
Well, I mean, Ron Paul can say whatever he wants to say. It doesn't matter what he says. Nothing gets done. So he comes on after the last two presidential elections, and he was in others before that, and starts banging on the Fed. And people like the Tea Party and others, the Patriots, are all behind him because of this. But it's just words. If he ever attempted to do it, he'd be Kennedy'd, if you know what I mean.
Oh, sure, yeah. He'd be Lincoln.
Well, yeah, and there's talk about Lincoln and Kennedy's assassination being tied to messing around, the latter of Kennedy, with the Fed Lincoln with introducing greenbacks and such. That may all be part of it. That is just part of it. It isn't the whole thing. But it is true. You don't mess with the Fed because you wind up dead. And that's all there is to it. You're not going to be able to mess with that machine. So, what's interesting, too, is that every candidate for being the head Fed person never gets rejected by the Congress. So everyone who's gone up there has never been rejected, and that's because it's all show. They have nothing to do with it. It's told to them the way it goes, and all they do is sit there and have this little pageantry and go ahead and confirm whoever's put up there for the position of head of the Fed.
There always has to be a national bank where everything is centralized and the European powers can pick our money, essentially, that ultimately. There has to be that national bank. That's really what the War of 1812 was about. But you see that right at the start of the country, and getting back to good old Georgie boy, he was in cahoots with Alexander Hamilton, and right off the bat, the first thing, I think it may have been the first thing, but Washington set up this national bank as soon as he was elected president, or selected president, perhaps. Washington was a friend to the bankers. He was not even a friend to his soldiers. He wasn't a friend to Americans. Another first thing that he did when we see that the Whiskey Rebellion, when some of his old soldiers had a rebellion, when he called out the federal troops against them, what he did was, and this was an executive action, he created what were called district states to supersede, to overarch the geographical states. In other words, he created legal fictions that would have the power in this country instead of the actual geographic states. And Montgomery goes into this. I don't remember exactly the details. Go check it out yourself. But this is how Washington justified calling out the troops, the federal troops, against some of his own former soldiers in the Whiskey Rebellion. And, of course, he did not even have to do that, as Montgomery outlines. We don't want to get too much into the Constitution on this show, but the Constitution already provided for that. Montgomery tells you how. But Washington wanted to make sure that these legal fictions were in place. That set a horrible precedent for, of course, all of the legal fictions that we ourselves are, the legal fiction corporations with our capitalized names and all of that.
Oh, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, what was created was a parallel universe.
Yeah, and
right.
That's what lawyers do.
Yeah.
And then, that's another thing. With these founding fathers, most of them were lawyers. And, when the Pilgrims came over here originally, and for the next century in the history of European settlement of this country, for about 100 years, lawyers were outlawed. The practice of being a lawyer, it was abolished. The Pilgrims, they had seen enough of what lawyers do to people and to a civilization. They knew what Shakespeare and Jesus Christ knew, that lawyers, they hide the keys of knowledge, etc. And how is it that, okay, for the first 100 years, lawyers are outlawed, then look how rapidly, though, after that, the lawyers infiltrated and took over and were running the country. And you look upon these so-called founding fathers, and most of them are lawyers. I mean, they were criminals just a few years before. The
worst words that Jesus Christ had for any industry was for the bankers and for the lawyers.
And the religious leaders, yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. But, I mean, when he lays into the lawyers, I mean, what a brood of vipers he calls them. That's great. But you see, that's the whole, like we said before, the structure of the world is you create a new market, you create a government, you get the bankers in there, and you get the lawyers in there, and you're ready to go. The next thing you do is create a military to do the bidding of the government. It's complete. And that's the history of the world in 30 seconds. I was going to say also that, remember something too, that there will always be, for the record, for the official record, there has always been and always will be beauty pieces written on all these government types, and they will always be just glowing, okay? Just understand that that's the way it always has been and always will be. But, like, for instance, to promote Shrub Bush as a Christian so much to the point where I think, was it Time and Newsweek? I keep it somewhere here. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, neither are you. We don't even care about parties. It's just to make people think there's a process and that they're really an important part in it, and they're not. And it isn't a process. It's just that it's a complete distraction from allowing people to understand that they're getting screwed no matter who's in office, no matter what administration is in, what party, it doesn't matter.
If people are engaged in the whole Republican-Democrat thing, if that's what absorbs you, then you might as well, to be consistent, you might as well go and become a fan of professional wrestling, the Hulk Hogan thing. Go for it. It's the same thing.
It's wrestling without the mats. That's all.
Yeah.
But
and it's just as fake.
Just to finish that thought about Bush, I'm going to give it, for instance, he was on the cover of Time or Newsweek. I forget which one it was. And, I mean, it made me vomit profusely. They had a cover shot of his head slightly bowed. I believe you can see his hands folded. There was this little luminescence falling upon his pate. The cover title was, "Is he too Christian to be president?" I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I mean, you talk about a Hollywood production. His spirituality is an absolute joke. But that will go down in the record.
It's worse than a joke. That's a blasphemy. The man is a Luciferian.
This is what we're saying, that there'll always be these beauty pieces about these characters. But if you dip back into suppressed history, if you want to find some criticisms of the Constitution, you can read the Anti-Federalist Papers. But that's not ever promoted, really, in school.
They only promote the Federalist Papers.
For the most part, that is true. And so all we're doing is taking a look at the way things really were, taking a look at the situation from other viewpoints. And one of the things I had to laugh at is that having a conversation with the I-Man one time, Patrick Henry was critical, probably the most critical of the big names about the Constitution, and yet he still signed it. And I shook my head and I said to I-Man, why in the world would he do that? Because he knew how bad it was. He's the one that said, today we just tilted more to monarch. And I-Man said, because above all things, he said he was a lawyer.
You and I have talked about another historian, Eric Phelps, a lot. Most of what Phelps expounds upon is amazing and correct. However, he drops the ball when it comes to the Founding Fathers. And he falls for that. He falls for those fluff pieces that portray Washington as a Christian and all these Founding Fathers as great men. All right, so having said that, Eric Phelps, I heard him recently say something where Phelps at least does get it about Jefferson. This is fascinating. I haven't heard this elsewhere. Phelps said, in the mid-1800s, there is a critical book that every American should read, 2 books actually, that were written by the American inventor Samuel Morse,
yeah.
And who invented the Morse code. Go find those books. You're not supposed to know about them. One of them is called Foreign Conspiracy. Another one is called Imminent Danger. You need to read those books. Okay. Samuel Morse's father was a minister. I forget what denomination. Now, according to Eric Phelps, Samuel Morse's father, who apparently was a contemporary of these Founding Fathers, Morse's father made the public statement that Thomas Jefferson was Illuminatus. That's a direct quote from Phelps, who I guess is a direct quote from Morse's father. That is creepy. Now, how many constitutionalists today, how many patriots who are totally anti-Illuminati, but they just love those Founding Fathers, how would that sit with them? One of their heroes, and it seems to be true from what I've read, it was Illuminati himself, Jefferson.
I guess most of my animus is directed toward him of all the early presidents. because what he said for public consumption, was so high blown and platitudinous, and yet his actions belie something entirely different. I mean, and that's the one thing you have to remember about these founders as well. The majority of them were lawyers, bankers, realtors, land barons, and slavers. Okay? So, I mean, Jefferson could say whatever he wants, but the guy was a rake, not a Christian. You can't be a Christian and decide to write your own Bible. So, to me, he was a huge hypocrite, and the one that makes my nostrils, flare the most. Go ahead. You want to add anything to that as well?
Yeah, Jefferson, he was a hypocrite about the slave thing. He wrote so glowingly about liberty, and yet he had slaves and even fornicated with his slaves, at least one. There's another hypocrisy you could look at in his life, too. He also wrote famous words about the need for revolution. What was it? Every few years, you got
to nourish the tree, the tree of liberty with patriot blood.
Yeah, the needs blood in its roots to the tree of liberty. Yeah, and yet, of all the founding fathers, he did the least fighting of them all. At least Washington was out there in the field. Jefferson never saw any war. It's easy for him to write glowingly about it.
Jeff was a lover.
Yeah, a lover, not a fighter.
Jeff wasn't a fighter, he was a lover. Right. This is going on now. Understand something. We're not banging on these people because we're communists or anything, or we hate this country, we love this country. I'm just saying what it is. Just calling it straight. And one of the reasons why we're in the fix we're in, and it's going to get deeper, understand something, folks, this is not going to get better. Not because I want it to get worse, because that's the way it is. Nobody understands right now that pretty much they've taken everything that we have. We just don't understand that it's happened yet.
The reason that in general Americans have historically had more freedom than other countries, and you know who writes about this too is Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America. Our freedoms, our historical freedoms in this country, have a lot less to do with anything the legislators, the founding fathers, or any man have ever done. It has a lot more to do with geography. We were just separated, fortunately, from the old world despotic countries. We were separated from them. We were far away with these big oceans in between us. And to the north and south of us, we didn't have a nation to threaten us either. So people could be left alone, and we had plenty of land to keep marching west. But, of course, now that time's over, and our freedoms are quickly going away.
Honestly, yes. Throughout the history of this country, I would say, and this is not forgetting those people who have been oppressed at all, but the standard of living has been pretty decent relative to everything else. We've had an abundance of a lot of good things. There's no two ways about it. But my point was that that's because we were being fatted and raised for a particular purpose. And I would suggest that purpose was to fill in the void that was left by Great Britain when it no longer could sustain its empire. So a lot like the relationship that you see in the movies with Mad Max, with Master Blaster, Master being the midget that sits upon Blaster, who's a huge Hulk, upon his shoulder. That's pretty much the relationship between the British government and our government, the two countries. And that is they run the show, but they had now us to fight their wars they no longer could. I want to say that we've been as fortunate as we have for that purpose. That yes, militarily we could stop everybody, but we did not run our own show. We were basically hitmen for the syndicate known as Europe. And going back to these glowing accounts of the founders, you had to swallow that stuff to think that we are right. We were somehow birthed the country that is kind of hinted at as being supernatural if you want to bring God into it. And that we were raised up and we really had no problems. But understand that we were still on very weak legs, even by the time of the Civil War. What do you want to call it, 80 years after our inception or whatever, and we did not get knocked off. I mean, there was a reason for the Civil War, and a lot of the instigation came from without this country, not inside this country. But we could have been knocked off then, and that was close, but we weren't. And then from that point on, we played to a certain tune, and we were beefed up, and put out there to do a certain thing for a certain purpose. You look at the two world wars. It would suck to have been brought up in Poland or France during either one of them, and that pain was real. But the United States had no dog in that hunt. And twice we went over there, which was none of our business. And yes, proper liberations did take place, no two ways about it. But we had no stake in that fight. When I hear that, when people would argue with me about it, it's like, well, Britain was our ally. I said, really? What did it ever do for us? Duh. So, fine. And what's going to happen is we're headed for a third one in the Eurasian continent. And that one is going to be our Waterloo. That is going to be our Napoleon at the door of Russia. We're getting ready to get kicked to the curb, but before they do it, they're going to steal our money, and then they'll exact our best blood, and then they'll kick us over, and our reign will be finished with. This is not going to last forever. The United States can be beat, and the script says that it will soon be beat. So, again, getting back to where we're going is we're just trying to find the real United States, looking in the mirror at all the warts and such, just to say, this is how it is. Don't get upset about it. It's been this way forever, and it's happening here. And that's something that American people cannot believe because we always win, we always kick ass, we're always right.
Well, one thing at a time. You mentioned the Civil War, the war between the states, whatever you want to call it. The key to that war, the reason it happened, is not about slavery. As you know, slavery was one issue of many, and it was not the most important one. The reason is, you can find the reason by looking at what happened later, right after it, the so-called Reconstruction Acts. When you see what really happened there, that is the reason for that war. In that Reconstruction Act, and the things we're not told about that. That was actually an act of reconquest is what that was. And whatever, and I'll say it, privileges we were given in the 1787 Constitution, that contract, those were finally done away with once and for all with that Reconstruction. Because what happened in the Reconstruction, well, okay. All right, so, and this is another reason Lincoln was killed. He wanted to welcome the southern states back mercifully. There was a northern rump of Congress, certain states, certain representatives from certain states in the north, not all of them, that wanted to have a conquest. And they did it. They did it. Right after the Civil War, the southern representatives came back. They were lawfully elected, and they even ratified all of those representatives, north and south, right after the Civil War. They even ratified the 13th Amendment, but then the following year, 2 years after the Civil War concluded, the representatives of the South and a couple representatives from the North, they refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. They saw the fine print in that sucker, and it wasn't even fine. There was a big danger with the 14th Amendment. And they refused to ratify it, so the Northern Rump Congress, they took over and sent the troops back in, and they unlawfully threw out the lawfully elected representatives of the southern states and New Jersey, and then I think Ohio too. So even in the north, a couple in the north, and that way they passed the 14th Amendment and they put the South under military rule. Or I think it was even martial law at that time, perhaps. But regardless, once you unlawfully prevent a Republican form of government in one or a couple of the states, you therefore destroy the guarantee to a Republican form of government in all of the states. In other words, what they did was violate and destroy forever the 1787 Constitution. That contract was finished with the Reconstruction.
We're going to have to bring this to a close quickly, but if you want to hit some other points, we'll open up the second part with that. But just to recap, also, it is true. What is strange about the Reconstruction Acts is that the southern states were allowed back into the Union as peaceable, but when they didn't play ball with D.C., they were put under military rule again. And I will tell you, from living in the South for the last 20 years, a lot of generational Southerners, could handle the fact that they lost the Civil War, but they could not handle the fact, and it's still these many generations passed on, were upset about what took place with the Reconstruction Acts. And, of course, that also led to the carpetbagging and other things. You could also argue that, again, creating districts once again under military rule has stayed with us forever. And that's another leftover from the Civil War. And there's other things for that, but we'll hit that individually too. So you make a good point, but that's a very strange part also of our history, that they would turn on the southern states, but they don't really tell you why. The other thing I wanted to bring into play too before we end, and that is Shays' Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion, if you can find information out about it. There is one book also that comes from a Marxist individual. I understand that. I don't like it. The Marxist, that's another just crummy form of government. But Toward an American Revolution by Jerry Frisia talks about what took place during Shays' and Whiskey Rebellion. It was more than just Shays' Rebellion in the western part of Massachusetts. That's because the colonists, who were now the new state citizens, did not want a federated government. They didn't want a national government, and they didn't want a national bank. And as Theo alluded to, they got all three. They got the bank, and with Washington playing good cop and Hamilton playing bad cop, but that bank had to be in there because it made it easier for the Bank of England and the European bankers to deal with us. Would you agree with that? I mean, on face?
Yes, and when the charter for that original national bank expired, the country didn't want it, wasn't going to renew it, and that was 1811, 1812, and that is why we had the War of 1812. Britain said, oh, no, you don't. You're going to have that national bank again because it's for our benefit.
All right, we're going to jump right now. We will be back with a second part. Thank you, Theo, for being with us. And, folks, we'll leave as much information out there for you if you should choose to go that way. And if you don't, I'm going to tell you the same thing is going to happen to you, but you'll never see it. This is the Alembic Files, and I'm one of your hosts. I'm in a good mood today. Al.
And I'm Theo. And this is a return to where we left off once upon a time. I think we left off at the Reconstruction era, Al. There's a lot we're not told there.
That's an interesting chapter of our history, probably as critical as the inception of the country, because, not even 100 years into this supposed republic, I think you could say that the Civil War eviscerated the United States to a certain extent and made it subservient to external forces, but of course behind closed doors or behind the curtain, however you want to mention it. And it also did much to expand the notion and the actuality of centralized government getting bigger all the time. I'll just leave it there. So, you go ahead. I pull some stuff also, but take us through this if you would.
Well, I have before me the entire one of the two books by James Montgomery that are available online. This one is The United States is Still a British Colony. I have it before me. I printed it up off of a PDF file. And what I'm looking at right now is Chapter 1, Will the Real Government Please Stand Up? There is much he writes about it and documents actual history here about the Reformation and what exactly went on. One of the most fascinating things is reading the transcript of President Johnson, who, of course, he took over when Lincoln was assassinated. President Johnson gave an impassioned speech warning the Northern Rump Congress, who were taking over, warning them not to do this, that it would forever destroy the country, and that what you were trying to set up down in the southern states is a military dictatorship, and the what was the title given of whoever the leader was, that military governor down there. He said that we are giving that person more power, more absolute despotic power than any monarch in Europe has wielded for the last over 500 years. And he goes, you got part of the transcript here. Montgomery doesn't provide it all. What he does provide is just It's moving, it's stirring. Reading this, Johnson was really adamant, but they overrode him, and it's surreal to read this stuff. You almost wish that President Johnson, would have taken it to the street here if he really had some courage. I guess he didn't quite have that much courage, but this helps to shed light on why Andrew Johnson was almost impeached.
Right. There was something, obviously, that was not setting well with even his own party. Let's remember something, too. We can talk about this later. We probably will. But Lincoln was not in favor with very many people. If there's ever, I think, the greatest similarity between Lincoln and Kennedy is that both presidents had uncountable enemies. And with Lincoln, his own people, his own party, didn't like him. And they were ticked off because he ended the war too quickly. And they were making money on it. There was a whole thriving business going on, which we'll get into some other time again. And it was making money for a lot of people on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. So they considered, as you had said last time, Lincoln too conciliatory. And there were actually at one time 5 assassination/kidnapping plots against Lincoln. One of the plots hatched by, like I said, his own people. So, yeah, absolutely. And Johnson, of course, may have been also too conciliatory. And it goes just beyond making the money. Now, after the war is over, it's over. But do we want to stomp the piss out of, the Southerners? I guess so. I mean, it really was, I think, an act of extreme meanness.
I'm looking at, let me read a bit here of what Montgomery writes here. Despite the fact, this is Montgomery writing now, despite the fact that the southern states had been functioning peacefully for 2 years, this is after the war concluded, and had been counted to secure the ratification of the 13th Amendment, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which provided for the military occupation of the 10 out of the 11 southern states. It excluded Tennessee from military occupation, and one must suspect it was because Tennessee had ratified the 14th Amendment on July 7, 1866. The act, the Reconstruction Act, further disenfranchised practically all white voters and provided that no senator or congressman from the occupied states could be seated in Congress until a new constitution was adopted by each state, which would be approved by Congress, and that's part of Congress. The act further provided that each of the 10 states was required to ratify the proposed 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment must become a part of the Constitution of the United States before military occupancy would cease and the states be allowed to have seats in Congress. Once you deny a Republican form of government to one state, much less 10, then you deny it to them all. You have violated and therefore destroyed the 1780 Constitution contract. We've been under military rule ever since then.
Correct.
But we should talk also about what was it about the 14th Amendment that was deemed so heinous that all of the southern states and 2 of the northern states, all the senators voted against it. They would not ratify it.
Was that Jersey and Ohio?
Yes. So those representatives were thrown out as well in the North.
As far as I know it, I don't get too extreme with this, but it would seem that the 2 key elements, and I don't have it in front of me, you might have the verbiage before you, but one, it really strengthened the idea of forget states' rights. That's not happening. That was very important that get through, because let's face it, they did not want any kind of secession again. And of course it never has been, and it never will be, by the way. So in that sense, it strengthened the idea of a centralized government. Again, this is something that wasn't desired at the formation of this country, but we got it anyway. Here again, it gets strengthened. And also, because what does it do? It makes states' citizenship subservient to you as a person, a citizen of the federal United States. Is that correct?
Americans used to be citizens of their state first, and then federal citizens second. Then it reversed it so that you're federal. You're federalized first, and then your state citizenship is subordinate to that.
I'd like to give an example. It may seem a little bit pedestrian, but that'll turn out to be a pun as well. Take, for instance, people get all upset about the national ID card. And I guess we may get a card in addition to the other pieces of documentation that we carry on our person or are supposed to carry on our person to identify us. Now, we have had two national IDs. One is called your Social Security number. The other is your driver's license. And I'll give you an example. They talk about you as a person in the eyes of the incorporated government. If you take a look at your driver's license, your name is in all caps. That's the other persona, I guess we could say, that you referred to the other day, that there are really two of you. There's a flesh and blood you, and there is the person, which is, if you want to say, an employee and a slave of the incorporation known as the United States of America. But what I was getting to is that you have a license that's issued by a state. Now, I've had 7 licenses, one from 7 different states. The number that I was issued upon my first driver's license in New Jersey is the same number I have now in Florida. And it was the same number I had in Iowa and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Vermont. So the thing is, you think it's a state document in a sense, and it's issued by the state, no doubt. But it is a federal document, and that does give you the privilege to drive, if you want to, outside the state and on federal roads.
On the King's highways. Exactly.
Now, the other thing about the 14th Amendment I want to get to also, and this becomes, I guess, more pivotal as time goes on, and that is it has that clause about not aiding rebels. Loosely what I was thinking about in the 14th Amendment, the third subsection, and it's a lot of blah, blah, blah in it, but it says no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, and I want to just pull some stuff out of there because it's got like one sentence and 17 clauses, who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, the government, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Later on, where that comes in is that we are defined as the enemy, pretty much around 1933 with Roosevelt and a revamp of the Trading with the Enemy Act, and that's all part of what took place under the Banking Act. And it goes on and on. But the extrapolation there of the 14th Amendment then is that no one can give us aid if we are the enemies, if we are the rebels, as it states in the third subsection. So in other words, when you go to court, federal court, that judge is not on your side, let's put it. And this also goes to the root of why patriots can't figure it out. When they go into federal court, they want to be their own counsel, and they try to use the Constitution as protection or remedy, and they are not entitled to it. We have been defined as the enemy of the state, if you will.
Or they tell their lawyer who's working against them to use the Constitution.
Good point. The thing is, then sometimes in these cases where people have tried to expunge themselves from the Social Security, or not, I should say the IRS, the tax, try to get out of that system. Sometimes they do bring a lawyer in, and it's like if you bring a lawyer in, you're screwed because you got 2 lawyers and a judge who are working for the state. No matter what anybody says, you kind of get caught like in midstream. And there's a case maybe we'll get to sometime later, very current case that somebody has been watching, and this thing blew up on the individual who was trying to say he was not good for having to pay tax. At any rate, this all goes back to why patriots can't figure out why you can't use the Constitution as a protection in federal court, be that as it may. This idea of an expanded government not good for the citizen, and of course being defined as a rebel for the rest of the existence of this country.
And then also that the citizens can no longer question the national debt.
Yeah.
So they can have their endless wars, perpetual wars in the 20th century later on, all financed by debt.
This is from The Informer. I'm just picking it up. It said, they, meaning the government, even wrote in the law that the signature card you sign when opening a bank account, unbeknownst to you, states in the 35 to 38 page contract that they are to give to you, but don't, that is the card, that you assume, that means you and me and everyone else, you assume the debt of the United States. And the informer writes, this is unconscionable under the commercial law that you were never informed. This is your promise, a subset in legal terms, which obligates and binds you to pay the debt of the United States by becoming the surety. So, in essence,
yep,
we're good for the debt. We are debtors from the moment we slide down the birth canal and are awarded the Social Security card. And then eventually when you go to work and you get your first 1040 or 1099.
We number our children at birth now.
So there you go. I mean, as far as we are good for the debt. And it even says in the 14th Amendment, I don't have it up any longer, it says that we're not to question the debt. Oh, okay. So here's a credit card, government. You do whatever you want with it. Just get back to us when you want us to pay.
Here's an interesting excerpt from Montgomery. All right, so it's clear that at least the northern senators who were behind the 14th Amendment, before it passed, they were somehow thinking that it would pass, that it would be ratified. It wasn't. The amendment fell short of passing the House and the Senate. And then Montgomery writes, the next action taken by the northern states, at least most of them, will go down in history as the most unlawful act ever taken by any government in the world. Since the amendment would not pass lawfully, the northern states decided to rip the 1787 Constitution up and take over the government. How did they do this? They told the southern states that refused to vote for the amendment they no longer were members of Congress, denying lawful states suffrage in the Union. In order to get the amendment through Congress, the northern senators also removed a seated senator from New Jersey to give them 2/3 in the Senate, and they counted 30, even then they counted 30 abstention votes in the House as yes votes to pass the 14th Amendment, observing how a renegade group of men from the northern states had taken the Constitution into its own hands and was proceeding in willful disregard of the Constitution. On the 15th of January, 1868, Ohio also, and then New Jersey, voted to withdraw their prior... So, yeah, Ohio later kicked in and said, we're not going to vote for it, and so they got rid of the Ohio representative as well as New Jersey. So they attacked their own in the north, too. It's clear they really were gung-ho for this 14th Amendment. And here's where I think it ties in with Dark Union, that book by Guttridge and another professor.
Yeah, Neff and Guttridge, yep.
They document how people like us know, especially when a country is at war, the government is working hand in glove with the bankers behind the scenes, and it's really the bankers who are in charge. And the way they wanted, these senators were so adamant about getting the 14th Amendment passed, especially with its clause that citizens could no longer challenge or question the national debt, and that they were later on, it opened the way, as you said, to have the citizens be declared enemies of the state. It just reeks of a backdoor bankster deal.
Well, they run the show. I mean, that's why we were going back to the beginning of mercantilism and commercialism. It goes right back to the bankers.
Yes.
You know, they found a way to make money on money without doing anything, set themselves up as needed in any kind of society like lawyers are, and it's a great scam. But they run the world, and that should be
getting... And they're parasites. They produce nothing.
No.
Like lawyers, banking, lawyering,
a
few other occupations we could think of today.
And we understand that both banking and lawyering have become part of the fabric of this country as well, and we all have to be involved in it, all have to be to a certain extent, but still it wasn't really what you would call a wholly sanctified industry, neither one. But it's there now, you're never going to get rid of it, and I think it should be getting painfully clear that from this point on, we're talking about right now in 2013 and onward, that under whatever guise they wish to rule, they're the ones who are going to run this show. And as we get closer to a one-world government, one of the first things I think that will be done, and I think that's happening right now, would be the institution of a single monetary system, Is that good or bad or indifferent? I don't know. I mean, it's there's certainly no more promise or chance in it for any of us. But that would be the first tying element to unite all nations under a one world government. That's after we get into regionalism with the unions that are springing up as we speak.
Yeah, and it's always, of course, going to be based on unjust weights and measures, paper money or digital money now. Nothing of value behind it. Yeah. Although the men in charge, the oligarchs in charge, they will and always shall have the silver and gold with them on their person.
Well, I think about all the courses taught in college about economics and such.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
I know, and I have to laugh. I mean, it's been a rigged deal from the beginning. Now, it's been good for a lot of countries and a lot of employees thereof, but it's this bit about Keynesian economics or the London School or this and that. Give it a rest. It's been a planned economy from the very beginning. It just
you can throw all that out in one sentence. All those college courses you just referred to, throw them out. And again, sum it up in the one sentence, he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is, as much as I understand people love to discuss this, argue it, debate it, shows how smart they are, and it's always good to have that kind of like debate going on because it seems to substantiate the existence of nothing. But right now, just as you had said, I mean, I'm laughing. I mean, I'm being somewhat, I guess, well, certainly sarcastic, but tongue-in-cheek to a certain extent. I don't think there's any money anymore. Whatever constitutes money, if it is gold and silver or whatever, the bankers have it. All we're doing is passing around worthless paper and trading electrons. That's all it is. I mean, there's not even, like you said, there's not even any promissory notes that we call money floating around anymore. There's nothing to back it. The only reason why it's working is because it has the momentum of believing, of all that use it to believe that it works. So I think what will happen one fine day, we'll wake up and find out that the whole house of cards across the world has been kicked out from under, and we'll be in some kind of global economic crisis, everybody. So I think, in a sense, that we're on borrowed time. And I hear all these things about trying to get back and paying off the debt, which we can't pay off. I mean, come on, folks. Stop. But this is all. I mean, it's like I said about Wile E. Coyote, the Warner Brothers cartoons. You know how he'll cross a canyon on what he believes is a tightrope? Yeah. Because the Roadrunner, fooled him. And he does fine until he looks down and realizes he doesn't have a tightrope underneath him. And he doesn't have a net below, and he's really in trouble. And a second later, right down to the bottom. And that's the same thing here.
Our monetary system.
We're crossing the canyon without a tightrope. We believe that we're crossing on a tightrope because everything seems to be worked. But in a minute, it just gets more ridiculous. 73 was probably when they stuck the knife into anything that really was of a certain kind of school of economics, when they got rid of the gold in 73. And also that was a time when from a lot of different backgrounds and disciplines, and I'm talking about, and I don't want to be too vague about this, but from everything from really economics, banking, to sociology, it was understood in 73 something happened. And from that point on, the tide that lifted at one time both the rich and the poor boats, all of a sudden wasn't lifting the poor boats, but the rich boats kept going higher. So at 73, you can see a departure between the rich, the middle class, and whatever you want to call it, the lower class. Now you have divergent lines, not lines going in the same direction.
About every decade in the 20th century is another one of, like 73 was, as you said, maybe real big landmark in that. And also, before that, in 1964, is when LBJ took the silver out of our U.S. coins. And that's when the sandwich coins, the clad coins were invented. Yeah, after 64.
And, we talk about presidents, but I know you believe this as well. And that is, the president doesn't do anything on his own volition. He doesn't make any choices. Yeah. He's put in there. He's told what to do, just like Obama now. And they always talk about, in the second term, a lot of radical things happen because they know they can't get reelected. Well, that's for our consumption. But the deal is, because we expect that, that's when the real good stuff happens in a two-term president's reign. And I mean, it is happening as we speak. So I have nothing against Obama. He's as much of a whore as every other president that ever sat in that office. They do the bidding of the people who do run this world and this country. That's why we say we don't vote anymore, because the people who run this country don't run for office.
To invest your ire or your love or your adulation, anything, to invest any emotion in the president, and including now Obama, it's like investing emotion into Kermit the Frog or name your puppet. It's a distraction. It's a show.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the acrimony between those who support, or those who were Democrats and those who were Republicans, the supporters thereof, the voters and such, whatever, as that acrimony deepens, and it is certainly deepening, it's interesting because more and more draconian things are going to be done to us, but we're too busy hating the other party, so that whatever Obama does, or what he's given to do, will be applauded by the Democrats just because he's a Democrat, and the Republicans will hate it just because he's a Democrat. And that happened in the 8 years with Bush before that, and on we go.
Did you ever happen to read the novel, and it was a series, but The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
No.
It's pretty amusing, and they made a movie out of it too. I think the author is, if I get it right, Douglas Adams, I think he's a British guy. It was interesting, and it was humorous. It's there was one of the parts I remember the most, because of the obvious metaphor that I got, that told me this author, he kind of knows the score when it comes to governments. He's talking about in the future where you have a universal government, kind of like in Star Trek, the Federation. It said that the presidents of the universe were selected not for any skill, not for any talent at all, and they really didn't have any real power, but they were selected for some type of quality, whether it's being obviously obtuse, say like a Ford, or anything, name it, bombastic. The presidents were selected for some quality that would attract the people, that made them targets of the ire of the people, so that the people would be easily able to vent on this single person rather than on the entity behind them, the whole structure behind them that was the real power. And I got a chuckle out of that because I was thinking, that's obviously this author gets it, and that's a metaphor for governments today, including and maybe especially the U.S.
Yeah, and that's just the way it goes. I would say we haven't had, whatever statesman we had, we lost along the way. I think there was a final drive by some who realized what was happening and weren't signing on, probably in the 50s, right after the end of World War II, and tried to bring to light some movements, some directions that they, the honest politicians, thought was not good for the people of the United States, but they were obstructed at every turn. And I think at that point, those who came in afterwards kind of understood you do it this way or you don't stick around. Let's
go ahead and ruin the Patriots' Day some more with their mythology about the founding fathers and whatnot. We're talking about how the bankers have owned this country since its inception, at least since the American Revolution and a little bit before that. But recall, and I have it in front of me where Montgomery goes into this, there were two actual reasons for the War of 1812, and we are not told those reasons in school. We're told, you remember, the British were kidnapping American sailors at sea and impressing them into the British Navy, right? You heard that in school?
Right.
And we were outraged at that, so that was the War of 1812. That's not that was the Cowboys and Indians story. The real reason, it was twofold. Number one, we mentioned this a little bit in the last show, but in 1811, the charter for the first national bank of the U.S. ran out, and it was clear that the people, the American public, did not want to renew it, so the politicians weren't going to renew it, and Britain said, oh, no, you don't. And that was one big reason, maybe the main reason. There is a second important reason, though, and that is, and this is really Twilight Zone surreal history, but the documentation is right before me. There was an original 13th Amendment, not the one that we see today. The original one called for, what it did is the clause in the Constitution which prohibited any title of nobility didn't have any teeth. There was no, if somebody did try to take part in our government who had a title of nobility, there was really no penalty for that, though.
Right,
so the original 13th Amendment put some actual teeth in that, and as Montgomery writes, when you're a lawyer, ultimately you are an esquire, which is a lower-ranking nobility in Britain, and so you couldn't be a lawyer and be part of Congress in America.
Right. To put that straight line, what Theo's referring to is that if you held the title of nobility, you couldn't participate in government.
And the lawyers, at least the upper echelon of lawyers, are tied into the British bar. You know, the lower and middle ranked lawyers don't know this, but the upper ones do. And they are beholden to Britain. And this would have prevented them from taking part in the government and aiding and abetting the fleecing of the American people with the National Bank. And Britain was not about to allow this. And so isn't it funny what you saw in that war? The British troops come in, invade D.C., and they burn down the Capitol building, and James and Dolly Madison have to flee for their lives. And then after the Brits burn the building and burn the documents, the information, then they just leave. When do you see in warfare an invading army capture the opponent's capital city and just let it go like that? There was obviously something else going on. I mean, you think when Napoleon invaded Moscow, if he actually took Moscow, or Hitler, were they just going to give it up?
It depends what the script said.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and in those two cases, why in the world do you guys go to Russia to fight in the winter? Not a good idea. But anyway, that's another thing. The War of 1812 is so multifaceted, and we have so little public information on exactly what it was all about. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of funky things going on at that time as well. I remember seeing a Canadian History Channel version. Yeah, and I mean, William Henry Harrison was leading troops into Canada, or at least with the idea that they would grab all the land between Detroit and Buffalo.
Twice they tried it.
Yeah, and so here we are, getting all upset about any kind of impingements upon our liberty, so to speak. But when we go off and try to be imperialistic someplace else, no, that's okay. We're supposed to do that. I mean,
and we got our butts kicked both times.
Yeah, because what it would have done is it would have given us obviously sole possession of a number of the Great Lakes, and we had that land bridge between Detroit and Buffalo. Where if things had gone differently back then, you wouldn't have to go through Canada. You wouldn't be on the Queen Elizabeth. You'd be like on like 105 or something. I don't know.
I remember it was about 15 years ago or more. I happened to be watching some TV talk show, or just a little bit of it. And one of the guests was Mike Myers, who's the comedian from, I don't know, he's done a lot.
Well, he was on Saturday Night Live, and he has Wayne's World.
And
he's Canadian, too.
He's a Canadian guy, and the host happened to jive him a little, give him a little joke about Canadians, the backward Canadians. And Mike Myers, this is before I knew real history, Mike Myers gave this quip like, yeah, well, we kicked your guys' butt, if you recall. And at the time, I'm thinking, what's he talking about? They kicked our butt when? I knew about, Benedict Arnold and the American Revolution. I said, is he talking about that? No. He was talking about the 2 times William Henry Harrison got smacked down in 1812 when America used the War of 1812 as a pretext to get aggressive and add to their territory.
Yeah, then he turned around and started kicking the Native Americans' people's butts.
Yeah, somebody they could handle.
Out in Indiana, yeah. Also, there was fighting up on Lake Champlain. There was a disputed territory up there, and even the United States, was accused of impressing British sailors. I mean, and then, as much as they go in and torch D.C. and, break for lunch and never come back, they go to Baltimore and it doesn't work out too well there. I don't know what that was about. And then you have the war, you have the Battle of New Orleans, which was after the war was over and shouldn't have never happened to begin with. The whole thing
But Al, that is the battle that gets stressed in American history textbooks. They don't talk about the Canadian part, what our shameful action in that. They just talk about the Battle of New Orleans, which was irrelevant.
And I can't speak to it now, but I just find it interesting. I mean, you could spend years on the War of 1812, but there was something going on down there with the Battle of New Orleans and everything with regard to slave trade. So that's another whole thing. But the point is, and I think this happened in our formative years. Okay, so we become what? We're all right now. We're recognized as a country in around 87, I guess. They throw out the
article. That's when the Constitution was finished. 1783 is when that Treaty of Peace was dictated by King George.
And then we operated under the Articles of Confederation, and actually, I guess it was James Hansen was de facto president under that law of the land. Then the Constitution came in and kicked out the Articles of Confederation. But what happens is, whenever we were getting too big for our britches, it seems we got a bit of a kick to the butt to put us back online, and that happened in 1812, and of course in the Civil War. And I think after the Civil War, it was understood what our role was, and not to act up like that anymore. And we did, and within 40 years, we wind up with this global fighting force that Theodore Roosevelt was told to show off. And now we become fighters from that point on. And as I said before, now our run is coming to an end, as all runs do. No country believes it's ever going to lose. I guess that's the way that France felt about Napoleon, Germany felt about Hitler. But it does come to an end, and ours is certainly headed in that direction. We've had it good, but that day is over with. And the return to yesterday is not going to happen.
I suppose that's the other thing that all countries and all armies think of themselves. They all think that God is on our side, and they all think that we can't lose because of that. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, all we're saying here is, look, we've had it decent. We admit that, okay, there are a lot of people as individuals and as racial groups or ethnic groups who have not had it all that great throughout the history of our country. But be that as it may, we are a republic, and republics don't last forever. In fact, they have about a 200-year, I guess, average lifespan, and then it doesn't work anymore. Whether that's done deliberately, and I think it is, or if it just happens because it's in the human gene pool, then
if you look at the Reconstruction, ours only lasted less than a century.
How do you mean that?
It's been over contractually since that Reconstruction era.
What's been over?
The Republic. Because as Montgomery writes, once you deny a Republican form of government to some states, you deny it for them all. We've been under military rule since the Reconstruction.
That is true. Yeah, there was a redistricting, again, as the informer and I had talked about, when they made the military districts out of the South. They actually did it to all states from that point on and forever. So, again, like we said, we have a parallel universe where you have the United States as we see them on a map, the contiguous 48 states and Hawaii and Alaska, and then we have the districts.
This is where we get district courts today.
Yes. So, again, there's two Americas in a sense. There could even be more if you want to get down to it. But actually, I mean, without getting too crazy, there are two Americas, or two United States of Americas, and there's two of us each of us have two personas. And I don't want to get caught up with that. I had noticed early last year, I kind of became aware of a lot of people who are all into this and the legality of it, which to me, it's like reading a phone book. I could care less, but that's the devils are in the details. It's true. And I just don't want to, my point when we did stuff in years gone by, it was like, look, let's get the reality of the United States and what we're dealing with. We are not always the good guys. This is not going to be a happy ending. And we have been propagandized since we could read and enter school. That's all I'm saying. It's just the way of the world, which is why I love that poem from Robinson Jeffers called Be Angry at the Sun. He wrote that in 1944, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said, hey, look, every empire takes its turn on the wheel. They rise and they fall. And that it's going to happen here. If you're going to be angry at that, then be angry at the sun. Meaning what? Don't waste your breath. It's just the way it is. And we don't realize we're in that stage now. But it's not going to be a happy ride from here on out. I'm not going to put a figure on whether it's going to be 10 years, 20, 30, or whatever. But whatever we thought we had, in essence, is certainly not coming back again. And what we were talking about before about presidents being basically whores, and they are, and the senators and congressmen who make a living out of being down in the District of Columbia, they know the way it goes. If there was an honest one that was ever in there, they spend one term and they're gone. Or they hang around and just get ostracized and get reelected in their own states. They come back and they're not allowed to play nice with other children. That's just the way it goes.
As Ferdinand Lundberg documents in his 1967 book, The Rich and the Super Rich, which of course is out of print because he was exposing the people who own everything, including the publishing houses. He documents how the politicians, and including the president, the politicians and the CEOs of the big corporations act as the gatekeepers for the people who really run this country, the dynastic oligarchical clans, the Rockefellers, the Pews, the DuPonts, the Morgans, the Fords, the Carnegies, the Mellons, and just a few others, Vanderbilt. So look at the title of the book, The Rich and the Super Rich. The rich are these gatekeepers, the politicians, the CEOs, maybe some of your upper echelon actors and actresses. But the super rich, the ones who really run the show, those are those clans I just spoke of.
Yeah, and it's been like that almost from the foundation of the country. You go back, the Roosevelts go back, at least on the Delano side. And of course, I guess the Roosevelts were one of the early patroon Dutch families that came over and set up on the east bank of the Hudson River.
But we hear people complain, the public complains about how much CEOs make. They don't even know the half of it, of course. The reason, this is what Lundberg goes into, the reason that the politicians and the CEOs are paid as well as they are is because, like I said, they are the gatekeepers. They know the secrets. They're trusted with the keys to the kingdom, to the truth about the fortunes and who runs the show. And so they have to be they have to be given a salary that would keep them quiet. They do not want to lose that salary.
What we're talking about is really that the only conspiracy is the history you don't know about. And you don't know about it for a reason. It's not because it was wacky and it got squelched rather, because it was crazy stuff. No, it is actually the true stuff. What we're seeing and what we've ingested since the time we walked into public school, or Catholic school, or whatever parochial schools, right? So whenever you walk into the education system, you're given revised history. That's revisionist history. That isn't the real stuff. That's the revisionist history. And the stuff that they call revisionist history is really the real stuff. And that's just the way it goes. That's propaganda. Education is propaganda. It's good to read and write, know that 2 and 2 is 4. But beyond that, you get a heavy dose of propaganda. And that's why we come up thinking what we think. And I was going to mention that one of the books I thought was excellent, again, a suppressed title, like Lundberg's was. The guy who had the publishing house that had the Chapanekas to put the stuff out was kind of a groovy guy. He was eccentric. and rich. And he was willing to put Lundberg's books out. Well, there's another one out there that never saw the light of day called Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Renee Wormser.
Oh, great book.
Yeah. This guy was a counsel and an aide to two commissions in the 50s that were tasked with finding out what in the world these tax-exempt foundations, of course, run by Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, blah, 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 all right, the same usual suspects, what they were doing to change the landscape politically and culturally in the United States. And they were obstructed. So Wormser wrote this book and said, this is the way it goes, guys, and, have a day. So that's out there. And I have to laugh because when you look at Wikipedia, don't fall in love with that because that's also propaganda. And I'll tell you what another one is, Snopes. Snopes isn't squeaky clean. And I had a little exchange with them. But at any rate, when you go to Wikipedia about Renee Wormser or whatever, or the Cox or the Reese commissions, that's what we're talking about. We call them committees or commissions. It's Cox and Reese. They said, well, they never really did find anything. This is Wikipedia's explanation, as if to say there was nothing there to begin with. Well, what do you expect Wikipedia to say? They're part of the problem, too, like all encyclopedias and mass-produced textbooks.
But they don't tell you why they never found anything. They never found anything because there was a hilariously obvious mole in their own ranks in Representative Wayne Hayes of Ohio. The man, during the actual investigation proceedings, was having conniption fits, vociferous ones, every 15 seconds,
right,
so that they couldn't even ask a question of the witnesses.
So that's how it goes, and that's what I say. There was probably, and there were attempts also. I mean, Kefauver at that time went after gangsters, and it was a really tumultuous time. We had McCarthy with the witch hunt. A lot of stuff went down in the 50s that really set everything else that happened to us in stone. But I also believe that a lot of what we would call good people who really have an idea of government, good government, just more or less found out, like Wormser did and like others did, that there's no way, an honest man can make it or an honest woman can make it down here in D.C. So
there is, of course, though, in that Wormser book, Al, remember, this wasn't on the record, but yet Wormser documents, anecdotal, his own life, a conversation Wormser had with a member of, I think it was the Ford Foundation, I'm not sure, but or the member of the Ford family maybe, where they told him that the foundations have done this, they've bought education for their own purpose, and he confirmed what Wormser thought, but of course this was off the record.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, what we're dealing with is reality that was created for us to accept and believe was true. In essence, it wasn't. And we'll go on and on. We can go on and document this, and we probably will. But it's just to share with
that old axiom that the victors write the history books. That's only half true. There's another part to that. The victors write the history books and then cover up their own tracks.
Yeah, well, that's it. They don't seek the glory in the public eye because they have untold power. Going for headlines is like what Hollywood does. Actors and actresses, let them make the headlines. These people understand true power and how to keep it.
Yeah, that old another saying, the power behind the throne. They are it.
I tell you what, why don't we hold it right there, because there's something I just want to throw in as a real good example of the history you never heard about. Are you okay with that at this juncture?
Sure, yeah.
All right, then we'll get out of here. I had always heard mentioned about the Russian Tsar in 1863 availing the United States of his two fleets, the Atlantic and the Pacific.
That's right.
Always heard about it. Sounded right. Sounded could be that could be the case, but I never really found anything until about 2 years ago. You certainly don't hear about this in any history book from grade 1 through college. And I had always kind of wanted to, get my hands on it. And finally, one day I did. And this is, again, what we're saying about the only conspiracy is the history you don't know about. It started with this one magazine. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Maybe I'll make the PDF available, and if people want it, I'll send it to them. But it happened from where I got the first inkling that it was true from a quarterly out your way on the Ludi coast. It was published in the California Historical Society Quarterly. And the title of it is Welcome to the Tsar's Fleet. The subtitle, An Incident of Civil War Days in San Francisco. And it goes on with this story about the Russians bringing their ships off New York City and off San Francisco Bay. And the Russians came in and were really hailed as guests or heroes or whatever, or somewhat of, I guess, allies. And here's the deal. You have to remember that Russia got a bloody nose in the Crimea War, when Britain and France, I believe, for the first time, were allies, and pretty much kicked his own rear end in the Russian military. Well, I'm sure they were smarting about that. Now, here's where it goes. There was a moment, probably around 63 or so. That was a very key period in the Civil War. Lincoln's change of heart that got him killed later on, as evidenced in his speech at Gettysburg. But you had the British in Canada poised to invade the United States. You had the French in Mexico poised to invade the United States. We were shaky. We were on wobbly legs because of the Civil War. And it was a thought that the two countries would come in and, of course, share the spoils, perhaps. So Lincoln, understanding the situation he was in. Now, the beauty piece, the story they give for public consumption is that those ships came over to aid, and this is true also, the Union fleet from being harassed very effectively by Southern ships. And what they were doing was the Southern ships were faster, smaller, and able to hassle the bigger ships that the Union had and disrupt trade and other things. So that was true.
Yep.
But also, it was because of this threat on both our borders. And it would make sense because at the time Russia was willing, or it said so at least publicly, that they wanted to get their ships out of Russian ports, I guess especially before the freeze, because they were at it with Britain still, and they were afraid that Britain would come in and scuttle their fleets while they were in port.
Landlock,
right.
Bottle them up in the harbor.
Yeah, because the Crimean War was, I guess, pretty much over the fact that the Russians wanted a warm weather port from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean through the Straits of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, I believe it is. Okay.
And the Brits had bottled their ships up in that war. So
they're willing to have another fight. So they came over, and I forget how long they spent, but it says this in the article. I'm not going to read it. I'll see if I can get a date on this.
What you're getting at, one thing you're getting at, right, Al, is that we almost had World War I almost happened in 1863.
Well, they took the squabble from Eurasia and brought it over here. The quarterly was released. That issue was published in March of 1947, and it goes through this whole thing. I mean, this is hilarious. In New York City, they gave the Russians a parade down Fifth Avenue. I mean, it doesn't get more conspicuous than that.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I did. To just see if that were really true.
They helped put out a fire in San Francisco.
Yeah, they helped put out
sailors.
Right, and there were some injuries amongst the Russians. Yeah, definitely. What I'm looking for here is if I have it. Oh, I got it. This is great. Folks, there is a source, an information source. The link is chronicling America, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. And you can go in there and you can go back into archive newspapers. They don't have the New York Times because they have their own. But I mean, you can go into, and I'm doing this here. I wanted to find out whether or not if I could find that episode in American history in a not a New York, but a U.S. paper. So since one of the cities involved was New York, I looked up the New York Tribune. Let's see. New York Daily Tribune, Friday, October 2nd, 1863. All right? And here on a front page story says, and this is what they call the tombstone headlines, where you have one column and you have a number of headlines. They've gone back to that a little bit nowadays. So in this particular article, they have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what they call decks. And these are the headlines. Our Russian guests. Second headline. Hospitalities of the city extended to them. Third. Grand military and civic parade. Fourth. Review in the City Hall Park. Fifth. Reception at the governor's room. Excuse me. And there is a sixth. Speeches of Mayor Updike and Admiral Lasovsky. And the New York Tribune. And all during that period in October, and for the time that they stayed, there are stories about the Russians being here, and we have never even sniffed a cent of that in any of our educational academic textbooks. That's amazing, isn't it? You got to love that one.
Whitewashed, erased history.
That's what I'm saying. Now, what is the problem about putting that episode into our history books? Is that because post-World War II we were supposed to hate the Russians and we could never know that they were our allies? All right. But what I'll do is I'll end with this. We'll get out of here. There was a toast at this gala that they threw for the Russian Navy. And Lasovsky gives this toast to Lincoln. The man to whom you have entrusted in the moment of your difficulty, the future of your country, and the man who enjoys the enviable fame which every man must, that of being an honest man. And they clicked their glasses and they toasted Lincoln. That's amazing stuff. So go to that website, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. Oh, by the way, I'm just looking around now for some of the papers and the stories they give out about both Buchanan's attempted assassination. That would be James Buchanan before Lincoln, and McKinley's
assassination. That's another erased history episode.
Well, I'm telling you, you can see what always happens, whether it's 9/11 or whatever. The very first reportage is probably the most accurate, and then the spin meisters come in afterwards and start giving out the story that everybody's to ingest for public consumption. So I was just looking at McKinley, and it's the three stories it had. This was 2 days after he was shot. He didn't die right away. It said McKinley's signs are good, everything's favorable, he's going to pull through. 3 days later, he died. Also, they were saying that the lone gunman, Shulgosh, had an accomplice. Where have we heard that before? And then there's a third story, and this is the best. You remember the story about how Shulgosh got next to McKinley at the Buffalo Exposition?
Yeah, he had like a towel wrapped around his hand.
He had a handkerchief or something wrapped around his right hand, which was hiding the gun there. So there's this like handshake line with McKinley, and there's Secret Service there. And this guy comes up with his gun and shoots McKinley twice.
Hello.
So the story is, geez, how come those guys, didn't catch him? Well, assassinations aren't done by lone gunmen, folks. All right, we'll see you next time.